Welcome to another episode of Forgotten Uniques, and here's my face. I thought that now would be a good time as any for this channel to stop being a faceless one, so I bought a webcam and there we go. Now, if you're new to this series, I'm covering unique items in Path of Exile that aren't being used very much at the moment and taking a look at how they function and how they interact with other mechanics in the game, especially with regards to more recent additions such as newer unique items or Ascendancy reworks. And if you want to check out the full Forgotten Uniques playlist, I'll link it in the video description below if you're interested. The topic of today's video though is Cospri's Will. This unique body armour was first introduced to Path of Exile as a core drop pool unique all the way back in patch 2.3 Prophecy League. But it wasn't until patch 3.20 Sanctum League that Cospri's Will received some very significant buffs, improving many of the explicit modifiers on this item. Let's take a look at the modifiers on Cospri's Will. 150 to 200% increased evasion rating. This local increased evasion rating modifier provides quite a considerable amount of extra evasion. With a top roll of 200% and a good base defense roll on the Assassin's Garb, with 30% quality you can reach over 2600 evasion rating on Cospri's Will. That's a decent amount of evasion gained from the body armor slot. It's not competitive with the amount of evasion on a well-crafted rare body armor, but considering this is a unique item with some very powerful modifiers, it's quite a good stat. The Trickster's Escape Artist Ascendancy Notable can make good use of this chunk of evasion rating by providing 1 maximum energy shield per 6 evasion rating on this body armor. And with good rolls and 30% quality, you'll be able to get around 440 maximum energy shield from this combination. Meanwhile, a Juggernaut could use the Unbreakable Ascendancy Notable in combination with Iron Reflexes to convert this chunk of evasion rating into armor before doubling it. Next, we have plus 31 to 53% to Chaos Resistance. This is a very large Chaos Resistance roll. A Tier 1 Chaos Resistance modifier roll on a crafted body armor goes up to 35%, so with a max roll of 53% on Cospri's Will, you'd be getting around 50% more chaos resistance than a tier 1 max rolled modifier on a crafted body armor. Add to that the fact that chaos resistance is typically more difficult to acquire and often appears in lower amounts than the other resistances, and this becomes quite a beneficial modifier to have. There is of course the potential anti-synergy here that should be mentioned with a Trickster using Escape Artist that may want to go Chaos Inoculation, in which case this stat would be wasted. Next up, you can apply an additional curse. This is an extremely strong modifier, and being able to apply an extra curse is something that pretty much every build can use to good effect, either defensively with something like Enfeeble, or more likely offensively with a secondary damage curse. Or how about both offensively and defensively? Hold that thought for just a moment, because to understand the true potential of this modifier, we need to talk about another modifier on Cospri's Will first. Always poison on hit against cursed enemies. This is the true strength of this unique body armor. Importantly, this modifier shouldn't be confused with the all damage inflicts poison modifier which exists on other items such as Inextricable Fate. The modifier on Cospri's Will doesn't make it so that you can inflict poison with something other than physical or chaos damage, but instead it simply makes it so that any damage you deal which can inflict poison will inflict poison against cursed enemies. As mentioned, by default, that's only hits of physical or chaos damage, but you can poison with other damage types if you make use of other mechanics, such as the Pneumatic Dagger base, which comes from Heist. That one has the implicit modifier, all damage from hits with this weapon can poison, or something like Volker's Guidance, which will allow you to poison with a particular type of elemental damage. So essentially, using Cospri's Will mean that you no longer need to invest into poison chance because as long as your target is cursed, you'll always inflict poison on hit. This is generally a powerful stat because capping out poison chance is often a bit of a pain for a lot of builds, even though this was made a bit easier in Necropolis with the re-addition of tattoos, but alas, we don't know yet if tattoos are going core. However, this modifier is particularly useful if you're attempting to poison with a mechanic which isn't specifically affected by modifiers to attacks or spells, because these mechanics are very difficult to cap poison chance with. For example, using Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction combined with Volker's Guidance to allow fire damage to poison. Modifiers which specifically grant chance to poison with spells, such as those on the Serpentine Spellslinger passive skill tree wheel, won't affect the Corpse Explosion portion of Detonate Dead. You also wouldn't really want to use Chance to Poison support either, as it's going to be a very poor damage link in such a build. Another example would be attempting to poison with the storms created by Herald of Thunder, in combination with the lightning version of Volker's. Once again, the hits from this skill aren't affected by modifiers to spells, so it's hard to find enough poison chance. And this is where Cospri's Will really shines, as it provides all of your chance to poison, and this is generic poison chance which will apply to things like Corpse Explosions or the Herald of Thunder storms. One thing to note about this modifier is that enemies obviously must be cursed. This can potentially be a bit awkward for mapping unless you're using some kind of curse aura setup with Blasphemy. If you're using a curse on hit setup, however, the initial hit cannot inflict poison if your only chance to poison is coming from Cospri's Will, because the curse is applied after the damage calculation for that hit. This isn't much of a problem for builds with high hit rate, which is most poison builds, but this does mean that if your only chance to poison is coming from this modifier, you pretty much must have either a Blasphemy setup or a curse on hit setup for mapping purposes, unless you only want to do bossing, in which case you can manually curse or use an Arcanist brand setup. So, going back to the additional curse modifier, this will allow you to make use of Despair and Temporal Chains without the need to spend passive skill points or your Anoint on Whispers of Doom. Even after the nerfs in patch 3.22, Temporal Chains remains as one of the strongest components of any poison build, providing defense via less action speed on monsters, whilst also slowing the rate of expiry of any poisons you inflict for more ramping damage output. Of course, this will mean that you can still make use of Whispers of Doom or another mechanic for a third curse if you wish, to use Punishment or Enfeeble, if you have the sockets or modifiers to do so. Now for the final modifier on Cospri's Will, your Hexes can affect Hexproof enemies. Hexproof is a status which makes Hex curses have no effect. It only works with Hex curses and doesn't interact with marks in any way. Hexproof also shouldn't be confused with Curse Immunity. An entity with Curse Immunity cannot be cursed by either a Hex curse or a mark, but an entity with Hexproof can still be cursed by both, though Hex curses will have no effect on them. This is important for mechanics such as Hex Blast, which requires the target to be cursed with a Hex curse to deal its damage in an area. The target is still considered to be cursed, even if the curse has no effect. The modifier on Cospri's Will then allows your Hex curses to affect Hexproof enemies at full effect, bypassing this status entirely. This is a nice quality of life to have access to, especially against some problematic rare monsters with many dangerous modifiers, where Hexproof will significantly reduce the damage output of builds using Hex curses, especially poison builds using both Despair and Temporal Chains. Cospri's Will also notably doesn't have a life modifier, so it can be used with the Life Mastery for 15% increased maximum life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armour. And something else worth mentioning, which can be a very considerable benefit to using this body armour, is that Cospri's Will is a Tier 3 unique item. It's not particularly rare, and that makes it a very good target for double corruptions in an attempt to obtain powerful implicits such as socketed gem levels or maximum resistances. Now, of all of the items appearing in this series so far, Cospri's Will might just be the unique which is actually used the most. The play rate for this item peaked at around 100 characters using it 2 weeks into Necropolis, before falling off quite sharply thereafter. So why isn't it used more often? Well, Cospri's Will is a solid body armor option for specific poison archetypes, but its modifiers are fairly generic, and to get the most out of this unique, you really need to be utilizing the Always Poison modifier to its maximum potential. Without that, crafted body armors will typically come out on top, with Hunter influenced body armors having access to the additional Curse modifier, whilst Delve biomes can also drop body armors with the additional Curse modifier, which means that those particular items can also have Eldritch Implicits, though they are going to be notably difficult to craft. The saving grace for Cospri's will, though, is the potential for powerful corrupted implicit modifiers, which may sway the balance against other options. A big thank you to my patrons for your ongoing support. If you're enjoying the content I make here on YouTube, you can join them and gain access to some exclusive perks in the process. All of the information can be found by following the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.